In medieval times, nobody handed you a house. You built it yourself or slept in the cold. No fancy tools, no hired help, just daily work and a bit of hope. It wasn't fast, easy, or pretty, but medieval peasants got it done. Here's what building from scratch really meant back then. Finding the perfect spot for your medieval dream home wasn't exactly like scrolling through Zillow. For starters, peasants rarely owned the land they lived on. About 95% of all land in medieval Europe belonged to either wealthy lords or the church, leaving peasants to build with permission, or sometimes just hoping nobody important would notice. Lords didn't visit peasants to give gifts. They came to collect rent. That's why peasants had to be careful about where they built their homes. Living near the edge of a forest was helpful because they could easily get wood for building and fire. Staying close to a stream was also smart because they needed water for drinking, cooking, and even that once-a-year bath people joked about. Some bold people did something called assarding. It means they cleared parts of the forest to make new farmland and places to build. This was actually illegal in many areas, and if they were caught, they had to pay big fines. But sometimes, if the Lord saw that they were making the land better, he would allow them to stay and just collect taxes instead. Back then, there were no building permits or zoning rules like today. People only cared about basic things. Would the area flood when it rained? Was the land flat enough to build on? Were there too many bugs? Believe it or not, some villages even moved over time. Not because someone planned it, but because people slowly rebuilt closer to better resources. The best place to live had three important things: clean water, wood nearby, and dry, solid ground. If you found all that, you'd settle down quickly, even if you still had to pay taxes. Of course, choosing a spot was only the start. There were no hardware stores back then. If you needed wood, you had to cut it yourself and carry it home. That was the medieval version of free shipping. Peasant homes were very small, usually just one room, about 15 by 20 feet. But even though the house was tiny, collecting materials to build it wasn't easy. Once a peasant picked a good spot and marked it with wooden sticks, the real work started. A smart location could help you survive the winter, but it wouldn't protect you from rain or wild animals like wolves. For that, you needed a strong house, not just a nice patch of land. In those days, forests were like today's hardware stores. But collecting wood wasn't as simple as shopping. Wood was the most important material for building homes, but getting it came with many problems. Access to forests was tightly controlled. Peasants could usually collect fallen branches for firewood, but cutting down live trees, that often needed special permission from the local lord. There were rules, called forest laws, that said who could take what from the woods. If someone broke those rules, they could be fined, or worse. In 13th century England, some people even had their hands cut off for stealing timber. Peasants didn't have fancy tools. Most of them owned just one axe, which was very valuable and often passed down from father to son. To split logs, they used wedges made of wood or iron and hit them with heavy hammers. No electric tools, just hard work and muscle. Timing was also important. Fresh wood, called greenwood, was easier to bend and shape, but it could shrink and crack as it dried. Dry wood was stronger and more stable, but much harder to cut and use. The smartest peasants cut wood in the winter. Why? Because during winter, trees had less sap, which made the wood stronger and easier to dry. After cutting, they let the wood dry or season for many months before using it to build. Different parts of a house needed different types of wood. Strong oak was used for the main support beams because it lasted a long time. Some oak frames from medieval times are still standing after 500 years. For flexible parts of the house, like the walls, peasants used softer wood such as hazel, willow, or young ash trees. These could be bent and woven between posts. Getting the wood home was a big challenge. Logs were very heavy, and roads in those days were just muddy tracks. When it rained, those roads turned into deep, wet messes. People had to drag the logs through the mud. That's where the real meaning of drag and drop came from. Because of the hard work, most people only collected wood from forests within a mile or two of their house. Forests were also dangerous. Wild animals like wolves and bears lived there. Bandits sometimes hid in the woods too. That's why many peasants went in groups. Working together kept them safe and helped with the heavy lifting. Sometimes, collecting wood even became a kind of social event. After weeks of chopping, splitting, and dragging wood back home, a big pile would be ready at the building site. With all the hard work done and seasons carefully planned, it was finally time to start building. The whole community would often come together to help with this next big step, turning a pile of logs into a real home. When it was time to build the wooden frame of a house, peasants didn't work alone. It became a big community event. Building a medieval home was always a group effort. The wooden frame, or timber frame, was the most important part, like the bones of the house. To start, people dug deep holes, at least 2 feet down, to hold the main support posts. These holes were dug with simple wooden shovels. Only a few lucky ones had metal tools like iron spades. Sometimes, peasants placed large stones at the bottom of the holes. This helped drain water and kept the wood from rotting. Next came the hardest part, lifting the big wooden posts. It usually took 4 to 6 strong people to raise just one post. Someone else had to guide it into place. Trying to do this alone wasn't just foolish, it was dangerous. Lifting a heavy 20-foot oak beam by yourself could get you seriously hurt. The way they joined the wood together was really clever. They didn't use nails or metal screws. Instead, they used smart wooden joints like mortise and tenon. One beam had a hole. The other had a tongue that fit inside. These joints were so strong, some still hold together today, even centuries later. To lock everything in place, they used wooden pegs called tree nails, usually made from hardwood like oak or maple. When it rained, the wood swelled, making the joints even tighter. The biggest challenge was raising the roof beams. These were very heavy and needed about 10 people, using ropes and poles to lift them. It was risky work. In one old report, 3 men were injured when a beam slipped. That's why teamwork was not just helpful, it was necessary. Villages had an unspoken rule. If someone helped you build your home, you were expected to return the favor. If you didn't help others, no one would help you when you needed it. Once the wooden frame was up and secure, the house started to take shape. But you couldn't live in just a frame. The next job was to fill the empty spaces between the beams, turning the wooden skeleton into a real, livable home. Once the wooden frame was complete, medieval builders moved to the next step, building the walls. For this, they used a method called wattle and daub. It might sound odd today, but it was a smart and cheap way to make strong walls. In fact, more than 90% of peasant homes used this technique. First came the wattle part. This involved weaving thin, bendy branches, like hazel or willow, between the upright wooden beams. It looked like a big basket. This woven wood made the base that would hold the next layer. Then came the daub, a thick, sticky mix of clay, mud, sand, straw, and yes, animal manure. It might sound gross, but the poop actually helped the mix stick together. Clay gave the shape. Sand stopped it from cracking. Straw made it stronger, and the manure helped it all bind. Making daub was a job for the whole family. Everyone, even the kids, joined in. They mixed the materials in a pit using their bare feet. It was messy but fun for the children. To build the wall, workers would press the daub into both sides of the wattle framework. They'd push it into the gaps until both sides met in the middle. Then they smoothed it out by hand or with flat wooden tools. Once done, the walls had to dry, and which took weeks. Rain or bad weather could slow down the process. If the family had extra money, they would coat the dry walls with lime whitewash. This gave a clean white look, helped stop bugs, and made the inside brighter by reflecting light. Even though these walls were made from dirt and dung, they worked well. They kept homes warm, and with proper care, could last for hundreds of years. And many did. Now that the walls were up and protected from wind and cold, the next question was, how to stay dry from above? The answer, thatch roofs. If you looked up at most medieval peasant homes, you'd see thick layers of straw, reeds, or grass. This was called thatching. It was the most common roof type across medieval Europe. Making a thatched roof needed real skill. That's why professional thatchers were highly respected in villages. Peasants could... Thatching was the traditional way to cover medieval homes. The process started from the bottom of the roof and moved upward. Workers placed bundles of straw, reeds, or grass in layers. Each bundle was held in place using thin hazel sticks called sways, which were bent over the thatch and tied to the wooden rafters. The layers overlapped so that rainwater would slide off instead of soaking in. The roof was built at a steep angle, about 45 to 60 degrees. This steep pitch helped rain run off quickly. If the angle was too flat, water could leak through. If it was too steep, the thatcher might fall off, which was dangerous since medieval healthcare didn't exist. Thatch was usually about 12 to 15 inches thick. Surprisingly, it worked very well. These roofs kept homes warm in the winter and cool in the summer. But thatch had problems. The biggest was fire. A single spark from the hearth could set the whole roof ablaze. Many medieval towns eventually banned thatch because fires had destroyed entire neighborhoods. Archaeologists found burned wood in about 1 in 5 medieval homes, showing fire was a real danger. Another issue was pests. Birds, mice, insects, even snakes made their homes in the thatch. Waking up to chirping birds above your bed was common. Most thatch roofs lasted 15 to 25 years, but with good care, water reed thatch could last 50 to 60 years. Old thatch was reused as garden mulch or bedding for animals. Inside the home. With the roof and walls finished, people had to make the inside livable. First up, the floor. Unlike modern homes with smooth, shiny floors, medieval homes had dirt floors. It was the same ground you walked on outside, just packed down by feet over time. To improve it, people mixed in straw, crushed shells or sand, and pressed it down to make it firmer, almost like natural concrete. In nicer homes, a thin layer of lime might be added on top. Floors were usually slanted to one side, so water could drain out. Walls were simple. If a family had enough money, they would paint the inside with white lime wash. But most left the walls as plain mud. Furniture was basic and practical. Benches along the walls doubled as beds. Tables were just boards on foldable legs and were taken down when not in use. If IKEA had existed, it would have given a single-page manual that just said, "Good luck." Storage was clever and space-saving. People hung their things on wall pegs or roof beams. Baskets held small items. Cool storage was made by digging pits in the floor or using shaded corners to keep vegetables fresh. Space was very tight. Most homes were just 15 by 20 feet. Yet they housed 5 to 8 people. And during winter, animals too. Chickens, goats, and other small livestock were brought indoors to stay warm. They even helped heat the room with their body warmth. Nothing says family bonding like sleeping next to your goat. Life inside a medieval home. Privacy didn't really exist in medieval peasant homes. The entire family, parents and children, slept in the same room, often piled onto raised wooden sleeping platforms. There were no separate bedrooms. Light during the day came from the open door. At night, the only source of light was the fire burning in the middle of the room. Even with such limited space, these homes worked surprisingly well. But the true center of the home wasn't the bed or walls, it was the fire. The hearth, heart of the home. Fire played a vital role in medieval life. It provided warmth, cooked meals, and gave light. But controlling fire inside a house was a tricky and dangerous task. Early medieval homes didn't have chimneys like we do today. Instead, they had open hearths, simple fire pits, right in the middle of the room. This central spot wasn't about style. It was the best way to heat the entire home evenly. Before the 14th century, most homes had no chimneys at all. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, called a smokelow, or through small wall vents. Often, it just floated up and found its own way out through the thatch. In a way, the smoke had to figure out its own path. Medieval style. Most hearths were just shallow holes in the dirt floor, lined with stone or clay. Some were built up slightly on packed earth to lower the risk of fire. The struggle for fuel. Keeping the fire going took effort. Families spent hours gathering wood. Dried peat, straw, animal dung, or even seaweed, in coastal areas, just to survive cold winters. There were no shortcuts, fuel was life. Without chimneys, smoke was always present. Homes were smoky. Hazy spaces, where the wooden beams above slowly turned black from soot. People living there got used to it, but visitors often complained about burning eyes and hard breathing. Daily life around the fire. Cooking happened right over or next to the flame. Large pots hung from tripods, and bread was baked in clay pots buried in hot ashes. The hearth wasn't just for heat. It was the kitchen, living room, and entertainment center all in one. A true medieval 3-in-1 deal. But this convenience came with danger. Fires were a constant threat. With wooden walls and thatched roofs, a single spark could destroy an entire home, or a whole village. Records from 12th century England mention at least 8 villages that burned down completely. A battle against time and nature. The hearth gave life to the home, but also brought daily risk. And even beyond fire, medieval homes faced other challenges. Harsh weather, rot, and time itself. Keeping a house standing meant never-ending effort to fight off the elements and avoid disaster. Living in the Middle Ages wasn't easy, but somehow they made it work. The never-ending job of maintaining a medieval house. Owning a home in the Middle Ages wasn't a hobby, it was a full-time job. Medieval houses constantly battled weather, wear, and time. Unlike today, there were no contractors or insurance plans. Peasants had to learn to fix everything themselves. Walls cracked, roofs leaked, and floors sank. Spring meant patching the roof. Fall required mudding the walls. Winter brought freezing temperatures. It was a non-stop cycle of repair. No wonder peasants didn't take up relaxing pastimes like knitting or painting. When your house is falling apart, hobbies take a back seat. Roof repairs, a constant struggle. Thatch roofs were especially high maintenance. Rats dug holes through the thatch. Birds pulled it apart for nesting. Rainstorms ripped chunks away. Locals even had sayings about the durability of thatch. Reed thatch will outlast the tenant. Straw thatch will ask when the new tenant is moving in. Wall maintenance and natural warnings. Walls made of wattle and daub cracked in dry weather and turned mushy when wet. Clever peasants whitewashed their walls regularly. The lime in the wash served as a warning system. When the white walls turned brown, it meant the structure needed repair before water damage got worse. In homes without chimneys, soot could also darken the walls. Sometimes, the color change meant more than just repairs. It meant you were slowly being smoked inside your own house. Floors and simple tools. The floor often needed new layers of packed earth or clay to fill in dips. In damp regions, homeowners spread sweet-smelling herbs, like meadowsweet on the ground to mask the smell of mold and moisture. Repair tools were very basic. A wooden float to smooth walls, a bone knife to trim thatch, and a mallet for hammering replacement wattle made up the basic toolkit. If you didn't know how to fix something, the go-to advice was, ask Grandpa before he dies. Archaeological sites show that peasant homes went through multiple repairs and were often completely rebuilt every 30-40 years, usually right on the same spot. Life inside, close quarters, and family time. Despite all the upkeep, these homes were more than shelter. They were the center of family life. Peasant families lived, worked, ate, and slept all in the same small space. A typical peasant house was only about 15 by 20 feet, roughly the size of a modern bedroom. Inside, you'd often find 5 to 10 people, parents, several children, and sometimes grandparents, all sharing that space. In the winter, even animals like chickens or goats might sleep indoors for warmth. There was almost no privacy. Families shared a raised sleeping platform filled with straw or hay. Beds were basically wooden shelves built into the walls. That means medieval kids never heard. Go to your room, because there was only one. Multi-purpose home and daily life. These one-room homes had to serve every purpose. They were a kitchen, a dining area, a workshop, a bedroom, and sometimes a barn. Mornings began with the first light of day, shining through an open door or tiny windows covered in oiled cloth or parchment. Glass windows were rare. These coverings allowed a little light in while blocking out the cold. Bathing and cleanliness. Bathing happened outside, and not very often. Medieval people weren't as dirty as we often think, but their hygiene standards were definitely different from ours. Despite all the difficulties, constant repairs, cramped living, and little privacy, medieval peasant homes were filled with life, hard work, and close-knit families who made the most of what they had. Daily life and hygiene in a medieval peasant home. Most peasants washed their hands and faces every day, using water from nearby streams or wells. However, full-body baths were rare and usually happened only a few times a year, mostly during summer. Meals around the hearth. Meals were a time for family to gather around the central fire. People ate from wooden bowls or trenchers, stale bread slices used as plates. Everyone carried their own personal knife to cut food. But few other utensils existed. Fingers were the original forks. The main meal of the day was typically at midday, with lighter food eaten in the morning and evening. Evening activities. Evenings were busy times. While there was daylight, everyone worked on repairs and maintenance. After dark, the fire provided just enough light to do tasks like spinning wool, sewing clothes, or carving wooden tools. Storytelling and conversation were the medieval version of Netflix, though sometimes buffering happened when Grandpa fell asleep halfway through a tale. Winter and close quarters. Winter forced families into even tighter living spaces. When the cold hit, everyone huddled close to the fire. Any remaining space was often filled with animals brought inside for warmth. One medieval poem tells of a family of 8 who shared their home with 2 cows, a calf and 6 hens during a harsh January. The endurance of medieval homes. Despite cramped conditions, no privacy, constant repairs, and smoky interiors, these humble houses sheltered generations for centuries. The homes were impressive feats of engineering, built entirely from local materials and using techniques passed down through generations. Even more impressive were the people who created families, communities, and meaning within those small, smoky walls.